welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be talking about books that I love that have magical realism in it. So magical realism is basically a book that combines fiction and fantasy together. So it is set in the modern world, in our world. However, there's something about the story that has a fantastical element in it, whether that be a character or something is going on that isn't normal, pretty much. So these are some of the ones that I have read and I've really enjoyed. Some of these fall more into the fantastical elements than others. However, all of these are set in our world, which is why I included them in this list. So be sure to let me know some of your favorite books with magical realism in it. I feel like magical realism is a great kind of segue into fantasy books if you're not really big on fantasy, or if you're not really big on, like, you know, the big world building that comes with a lot of fantasy books, and you're just wanting something that's more modern and something that you can better understand. I feel like magical realism is perfect for that. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So most of these books are standalones. However, I do have a couple of series that I want to talk about, only two, and I haven't read the entire series yet, so just be aware of that. But let's just go ahead and jump right on into it. So the first series that I want to talk about, I believe it's just a duology as of right now. I'm not sure if there's going to be a third book coming out, but that is My Roommate is a Vampire. The sequel to this is My Vampire Plus One or something like that. So this book is set in the modern day. She lives in the Chicago area, and she finds a listing for an apartment with a roommate who ends up being a vampire. So this is like a really great kind of, you know, example of the magical realism being more of a character as opposed to like a magic system or something along those lines, because everything else about Cassie's life, who is our female main character, is completely normal. She has a very normal job. She lives in a very normal, you know, area of the country, but all of a sudden she finds out vampires exist and she ends up rooming with one. So yeah, I really loved this book. I read this during September, October-ish of last year, and I thought it was a really great book for that time of year. And I think I've talked about this book before on my channel. I think that this is a great book because, like I said, it's set in our world. So it's kind of fun kind of seeing a fantastical creature kind of trying to figure out how our world works and exactly what it all entails. So if you're wanting something that is more along those lines, I feel like this is a great book for that. And there is a really great romance in here, and the spice is not too bad, I will say. The second series that I wanted to talk about is a series that I have talked about, I think, a couple of times on this channel, but I feel like this is a great example of that. And I've only read the first two books. I haven't read the third one yet. And I believe the fourth one is coming out this summer, but that is the Witch Lore series. I know I've talked about it quite a bit on here. First book is Small Town Big Magic. Second book is Big Little Spells. The third book is Truly Madly Magically. I still need to read that one. I'm hoping I'm going to get to it at some point within the next few months, but we'll see. This book, it is set in a fictional town in Missouri, but it still kind of gives that Midwestern small town feel, which I'm a sucker for anything that has to do with a small town. I don't know why. I love small town books. They're just so much fun. But I really love this book, and it focuses on witches. In the first book, we have a woman that realizes that she is a witch and had her memories erased. And then the second book is her sister, who was exiled from this city and is trying to come back to it. So really love this book. If you're really wanting something that involves witches, but is not like spooky. I feel like this is a great book for that. There's a great relationship in both of these books for each one of these characters. I love both characters in their own ways. I do kind of like the main character in this book more than this book, but honestly, they're pretty awesome. And I'm excited to read the third book with our main character in there, which is a friend of these two sisters. So really enjoy this series. If you want to know more about what it's about, go check out my other videos on this series. And yeah, great for magical realism, but it definitely, I feel like, focuses more on the fantastical elements, but it still is set in our world, so I feel like it is very easy to comprehend. And it also has really good spice in this book too, if that's a factor for you. All right, now let's talk about the standalones. I have 5, I believe, standalone books that involve magical realism. I may not remember every single one of the places that these places are set in, but I do know that they're all set in either the US or just in our world in general. So like in Europe or somewhere in around those lines. So yeah, they're not set in like a fantastical world. So this one is kind of a weird choice because it's technically a fiction book, but I feel like this still counts because there's such a mysteriousness about the circus, and there's still such a whimsical, there could be magic involved. So this is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, and I just felt like this is a book that I just had to mention on here, because if you're not wanting something that's like about magic or about like, you know, a fantastical creature or something like that, I feel like this is a really good book because, like I said, it is technically a fiction book, not really a fantasy book, but I feel like because of the way the circus is and kind of the mysteriousness behind it, I do feel like this is a great book if you're wanting to kind of dip your toes into more of a fantastical type of book. And like I said, it is a standalone. I gave this 5 stars when I read it, and it was one of my top 5 favorite books of 2023. It was in the 5th spot, and I actually have been wanting to kind of reread this. This might be a book that I might decide to reread at some point this year, because like I said, I just really enjoyed this book. It also has a really great cast of characters. There's no plot in this book, not really. It's more focused on the characters and their lives as well as the circus itself. And if you want to know why this circus is so mysterious, just check out this book, because I don't really want to give spoilers, because like I said, this book is so like mysterious that I kind of feel like you need to go in blind. So yeah, just know, great book, maybe not super fantastical, but I still would give it a read if you're wanting something that isn't just a contemporary. Alright, the next book that is a magical realism book that I really like is Cackle by Rachel Harrison. This is a book that I've actually read twice. I read it, it was like one of the first books that I read when I very first got back into reading. I think it was like my 3rd or 4th book that I read when I very first got back into reading, and then I read it about a year later in September-ish of last year, and I annotated it like I do with all my rereads, and it just reminded me of how much I really enjoy this book. So it is set in New York, I'm pretty sure, I think, yeah. So the main character, Annie, she goes through a really bad breakup, and she decides she needs a fresh start. So she moves to upstate New York in a small town, which again, sucker for a small town, and she ends up meeting this very interesting character by the name of Sophie. And Sophie is kind of this very known figure in this small town. And Sophie ends up befriending Annie, and Annie learns quite a bit about her that is very fantastical. So this is another case of, you know, normal girl in a normal life in a normal place, but meets a very fantastical character. And I really enjoyed this book. I loved the character of Sophie. I thought she was so interesting, and I loved the mysteriousness about her. I also loved seeing the growth from Annie. I have talked about this book before in another video, my rereads video. So if you want to know more about my thoughts, go check out that video. But yeah, I think that this is a great book for magical realism, and it's really, really good, and I feel like it deserves more love. And it is also really good for the fall spooky time, and the vibes for this, especially during the fall time, it goes through an entire like year, but it starts out more in like the fall season, and the vibes are so good. They're so good. I love this book. I think it's really, really good. All right, next up we have a romance. This is a novel love story by Ashley Poston. This is another book that I have talked about. It was a 5-star read for me last year. It was my last 5-star read of last year, and the book that helped me hit my goal for the year last year. So really love this book. And so this one is more of a magical place. So our main character, Elsie, or Eileen is her full name, she decides that she needs to go to this cabin, even though none of her friends that usually go with her can go that year. And she ends up stumbling into the fictional town of her favorite romance series. So this is such a very interesting concept to me. I love the idea of a character from our world getting stuck in a book. I feel like that just is so reminiscent of like my childhood. I don't know why, but I feel like that is something that I would totally see in like a kids show. I feel like there were a couple of kids shows where it was like characters from our world would go into books. I feel like that was the case with like my shows when I was like really little, like in preschool. So it was just very reminiscent of that era in my life, and I really, really love that. And not to mention the fact that this book is just so sweet, especially with it being a romance series. The descriptions of this town are just so good. It really makes you feel like you are stuck in a small town romance that is just picture perfect, and it is just so good. I also love the romance in here. I thought it was really, really good, and I felt like it really held its own. There was a part of the ending that I wasn't really a huge fan of, but then it ends up working out at the end. So yeah, really love this book. If you like, you know, books that involve like people from our world getting stuck in another world, this is a great book for that. Next up we have In the Shadow Garden by Liz Parker. I've talked about Liz Parker before on here. She's one of my favorite authors, and I just got her most recent book at the end of last month. So this is a book that I have talked about on my channel before. It was my last book that I was able to finish in 2024. This was actually a reread. I read it for the first time in the fall of 2023. So yeah, really enjoy this book. I thought it was really, really good. And basically what it is, it's that it is a family that have magical powers, but it is set in our world. I'm not sure exactly where it's set. I think it's in like Massachusetts or something like that. I could be totally wrong though, but I know it's set in like our world, but it's a family that have magical powers, and you know, they can see fortunes through tea, and just the way that it is, like everything is described, it is so amazing. And considering this is Liz Parker's debut novel, it's pretty crazy how good the writing is. I love this book. I think it's a fantastic book. If you love Encanto, this is a great book for that because it's very reminiscent of that. Also, if you love feuding families in books, this is another great book for that. And if you like a good twist at the end, this is also a very good book for that. Yeah, really recommend this book. I think it's great. There's a few romances in here that I think are really, really good. So yeah, be sure to give this book a chance because it's really good, especially for magical realism. Right. Next one is kind of a weird one. But it is The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. So this one involves time travel, which I feel like is more of a sci-fi thing, but this is definitely not a sci-fi book. It is definitely more of a fiction book, but with magical realism, like I said. So this is about a family the women in this family seem to always go mad after a certain age. The character of June, who is our main character in this book, she finds out that the reason why these women in her life go mad is because there is time travel involved. And it does kind of make the plot a little bit confusing because there's a lot of different timelines and things going on. But I feel like this is such a good book. It really focuses on family, about finding your people, about, you know, finding love in mysterious ways. I really enjoyed this book when I first read it. I thought it was fantastic. You know, it was a little confusing and the ending is kind of open, but I still think it's great. I love this book. I definitely recommend it, especially if you love time travel, but you're not really wanting a sci-fi book. I feel like this is a great book for that because it is not sci-fi. It is set in our world. It has people in our world. There's different time periods that we focus on, and I think that it's such a great book. If you're wanting to dip your toes into more fantasy or sci-fi elements, but you're still wanting something in today's day and age. And then last but not least is, of course, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. So this is another one that's kind of is it magical realism? But I guess technically yes, because of the fact that Addie is cursed to live forever. And obviously that is not something that really happens in our world that we know of. So for those guys who have never heard of this book, which I don't know how, because I've talked about this book, I think on almost every single one of my videos. This is about Addie LaRue, who makes a bad deal with a devil, god, whatever, and she is cursed to live forever but to never be remembered. And what is there to say about this book that I haven't already said? I love it. I think you need to read it. It's a great book, you know, again, for somebody who, you know, wants to dive into more fantasy books, but isn't wanting to get into like the confusing world building or just the high stakes or things like that. I feel like this is a great book for that. You know, like I said, it's very like not super complex fantastical elements. It's simply a curse. It's a curse that I feel like is very easy to follow. And what's really cool about this book is that we get to see, you know, I think it's 300 years that Addie has lived. We get to see different points of view of how she handles having this whole curse brought upon her and how she uses this curse to her advantage, how it breaks her heart, you know, things like that. And I can't really say anything else besides go read it. I think that this is a great book with magical realism. It's not super magical, but it's definitely still a really good book. So those are all of my book recommendations. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know if you're wanting books that are just true fantasy, like full-on fantasy, because I could definitely make a video about that because fantasy is my favorite genre of all time. So yeah, I just feel like these books, we just don't really talk about magical realism all that much. I mean, we do, but not as much as I feel like we should. And there are people out there who just don't want a fantasy world. They want something in today, in a world that they can understand. And I feel like these books are great for that. And they all span different, you know, time periods, different genres. And so yeah, let me know your favorite book with magical realism and just any books that you recommend to me in general. And with that being said, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and go. So I will see you guys in the next video.